Hi, this is Courtney Sigler for EDU 554 with my benchmark assignment video. So due to the beginning of the new school year and not being able to acquire proper permission from all of my students, I was unable to do a video segment recording my lesson, but I did have the opportunity to videotape myself going over everything that was required during the video for the benchmark. So the lesson that I taught was in our Unit 1, which is place value, and the main focus was comparing numbers up to 1,000,000. So prior to this lesson, the students, we had already talked about the place value chart and all the different positions all the way up to the millions. They had already done rounding numbers, and last year they were already exposed to comparing numbers greater than, less than, or equal to, but only up to the thousands place. So we were jumping several more spaces in comparison to, or for this lesson. So during the lesson, I always start my lessons out and we start by taking some notes in our math journals. And with the notes, I provide, with the students through my teaching, I provide them with pictures and little explanations, not anything too detailed that when they go back to reference it, it's too overwhelming. I keep it very short and simple for them to use as a reference to make it quick. So we started off with our notes, and I started very basic with numbers I knew they'd know, just comparing to the hundreds and the process in which that happens. And then I gradually got bigger into the thousands. We did another problem, and then showing them that the same concept applies. It doesn't really matter how many place values they go, it will just it's a longer process, but the concept is still the same. Most of the students were like, oh yeah, I remember that, and things like that. I did have a student during notes, he kind of got a little distracted and was reading a book instead of really taking his notes, so he needed to be redirected. Some students also that were on the floor began to kind of play with their pencils and started a little pencil war, so I did have to separate them as well during the notes. I like to gather my students down onto the floor. I find that when we're all in an area engaged together, the students do a lot better than if I just have them at their seat trying to take notes. They're much less distracted, and few students are distracted during the note-taking process if they're down on the floor and they're only really focused with their notebook is looking up at the board and taking notes and having a discussion with me. So after we took our notes, we did some sample problems on our whiteboards, so I could kind of get a visual kind of idea of how students were doing, and it kind of pinpointed about 4 students who were struggling with still comparing numbers greater than, less than, and equal to. So I went over the math assignment with the students and what they were going to be doing. It was a cut and paste activity with the little alligator, which was something that they loved and they enjoyed, that the alligator mouth eats the larger number. The little help for the students to remember which direction it should be going. When they placed the cut and paste, they would cut out the symbol and then they'd glue it appropriately based on the 2 numbers that they were comparing, or if it was equal to as well. So I actually pulled the 4 students who were not really understanding it as well back to, I have a kidney table in my room, and I pulled them back for a little bit more one-on-one help and see which areas they were getting confused on, if it was the process, if they weren't understanding the proper place value and how far they should be going, were they comparing the right set of numbers when they looked at the project or the problem as a whole. 2 of the students caught on pretty quickly and they were dismissed back to their seats. The others I pretty much kept an eye on the rest of the time that they worked, and they were, almost there. They were kind of starting to pick up on it, but not 100% yet. So after the assignment, I kind of just did a brief check to see, I always do check my students' answers after they've completed something, like, oh, you're right on track. Any of my fast finishers, they play on a game called Prodigy, and Prodigy is a game that allows students to, it's math problems that they solve. It's a free website, but it's adaptive to their learning. So if they miss a question, Prodigy recognizes that, and then they move them down to a more simple question, but if they get it right, then it can move them on to more difficult. So it's self-paced, and students can be on all different levels. Even if you have students who are not performing at grade level, you can assign them a lower grade to work on math problems that do work for them. As far as differentiation goes, my main differentiation was my students who I noticed after a quick formative assessment of who wasn't getting it. I pulled them back for a little bit more one-on-one support. I did have some math riddles the students had to solve if they finished their problem as well before they moved to Prodigy. That was kind of just a little teaser, but it applied the strategy of comparing numbers in order for them to figure out the riddle, which they really enjoyed. We also watched a Go Noodle video that taught students dance moves that went and lyrics that go to remembering which way is the greater than symbol, which way is the less than symbol as well. So overall, I thought my lesson went well. I gave the assessment the following day after we had done the complete lesson. We also did an exit ticket at the end of the lesson too, just so I could see if the same students were still struggling, if they started to pick up on it. So I gave them the assessment, and for the greater than, less than, I actually had 26 out of 29 students that passed the assessment. So I was very pleased with that. It showed me that they retained the knowledge that they had from the previous year, but also being able to apply that new knowledge to higher numbers all the way up to the millions. And that was my lesson.